Thank you very much, Senator Warren, and we again welcome Dr. Weil as the nominee to administer the Wage and Hour Division at the Department of Labor. This division oversees some of the most fundamental protections for American workers. It ensures that people are paid fairly in accordance with our minimum wage and overtime laws. It protects vulnerable children when our child labor laws are abused. It ensures that workers can spend time with their families when a new baby is born or a health crisis is looming. In short, this relatively unknown agency plays a huge role in how Americans experience their day-to-day working lives. However, despite this important mission, this critical agency was unfortunately allowed to atrophy during the past administration. The agency took a backseat approach that relied almost exclusively on complaint-driven enforcement, relying on the questionable assumption that vulnerable workers know their rights and will approach the agency to report violations of the law, rather than taking a more proactive approach to educate workers and seek out industries and populations where abuses are likely to happen. The current administration has corrected these problems and beefed up the enforcement and revitalizing this essential agency. Again, this is in large part due to the comprehensive guidance provided by the expert sitting before us today, Dr. Weil, as well as the dedication of career staff in the division. The Department of Labor has long looked to Dr. Weil for expert advice. He has answered their call. While he has never worked directly for the agency, he is intimately familiar with its structure and mission as well as the challenges it faces. As has been said, he has studied and written extensively on the most effective ways to use limited resources to most effectively increase compliance with critical workplace protections. He has spearheaded new ways of thinking and enforcement and investigations that will have the greatest impact and most sustainable, long-lasting results. In a time of increasingly tight budgets, this sort of innovative thinking will be a tremendous asset to the agency. A group of Dr. Weil's peers, respected academics at a variety of universities, have strongly endorsed his nomination and have only the highest praise for him. I ask unanimous consent to include the text of these letters in the record. Dr. Weil brings unique perspective to all of these issues. Again, he has a wealth of experience in collaborating with many groups, often playing a role of mediator and advisor, skills that will be extremely appropriate to a role leading the Wage and Hour Division. Dr. Weil has received strong recommendations of his professionalism and fair-mindedness from past and current deans of his business school, former colleagues and partners on a variety of projects who represent both management and labor, and I ask unanimous consent to include the text of these letters in the record. So it is clear that Dr. Weil is an exemplary candidate to administer the Wage and Hour Division. It's unfortunate that this division has been without a Senate-confirmed leader for many years now. Again, I join with Senator Warren in hoping that we can work together to expeditiously move Dr. Weil's nomination following today's hearing. It is a critical agency responsible for protecting our nation's tens of millions of workers. And Dr. Weil, I look forward to hearing more about your background and experience and your plans for the Wage and Hour Division. And with that, I will yield to Senator Alexander.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Dr. Weil. We look forward to considering the nomination of Dr. Weil. As the chairman said, this is an important agency which oversees the enforcement of more than a dozen major laws which govern just about every private sector employment relationship in the United States. If confirmed, he'll be charged with supervising the work of over 1,800 employees in 54 field offices covering all of our states and territories. My understanding is that Dr. Weil has never supervised more than 15 or 20 people, so that was in an academic research setting, so I'll want to talk about a little bit about his management skills and his plans in that way. As the Committee of Jurisdiction for the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor, we want to make sure that anyone confirmed to lead this has appropriate management and practical experience. And I may have some written questions to explore that. Also have some questions about Dr. Weil's views on enforcing current law, which I hope he'll answer thoroughly. I'm concerned about an agenda that aims to stretch the law to redefine what constitutes an employer and an employee in order to reach beyond a franchisee owner and penalize larger corporations. The franchising industry has been an incredible engine of economic growth in our country. According to the International Franchise Association, it's created hundreds of thousands of successful small businesses employing over 8 million individuals. Many of these businesses are owned by people who started on the bottom rung of the economic ladder, making minimum wage and working their way all the way up to the top. Many of them are owned by women and minorities. For so many people, franchising has been the path to the American dream. I think of my friend Sandy Bell, who dropped out of college at the University of Tennessee about 40 years ago and went to work in a Pizza Hut. Then he founded his first Ruby Tuesday, and pretty soon he had a company with 800 Ruby Tuesdays when he retired a couple of years ago. A nominee with a singular focus on inappropriately stretching current law to throw a big wet blanket on that dream is not one that would have my support, nor could I support an enforcement strategy that focuses on preconceived targets set in Washington rather than being responsive to complaints of breaches of the law, or a strategy that has the underlying goal of increasing unionization without regard to the desires of employees themselves. There's some serious concerns here that need to be reviewed before the nominees put in charge of the agency.
Dr. Weil, there's been a lot of attention to your report, which was commissioned by the Department of Labor during the last Bush administration, on strategic enforcement of wage and hour laws. Why is strategic enforcement the right or most effective method?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason strategic enforcement is so important gets back to the basic problem of limited resources that the agency faces. It has, as the ranking member said, 1,800 employees that have the responsibility of overseeing over 9 million workplaces in the United States. And given that the careful use of those resources has to be undertaken, and that requires both setting priorities about where the major problems are and really understanding the forces that give rise to noncompliance problems. And then, given that, using enforcement as well as outreach and education tools appropriately according to where those problems lie. So it very much results from the fundamental need to achieve objectives by applying resources very carefully.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weil. That's really all I have. I'll turn to Senator Alexander now. I recognize Senator Warren for at least a few minutes of questions before we have to recess.
Okay, I just have one, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Dr. Weil, I understand that you are the lead technical advisor for the research study on the underground economy that's been commissioned by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That one of the difficulties of enforcing misclassification laws is there's very little data on how widespread the problem is. So, for example, the IRS's last comprehensive worker misclassification estimate was done almost 30 years ago, all the way back in 1984, and it found then that worker misclassification was costing the U.S. about $1.6 billion in revenues. Remember, that's 1993 dollars, so that's about $3.6 billion in today's dollars. So I'm pleased that the IRS is including another study as part of its national research program. And I understand the Department of Labor is also looking to do a survey of thousands of workers to get more information about the prevalence of misclassification. So I understand that you're a proponent of trying to use objective data to guide enforcement policies, and I wondered if you could just give us a few examples of how the Wage and Hour Division could use data to enhance its effectiveness in enforcing the laws on misclassification.
Thank you, Senator Warren. I very much agree that in the area of misclassification, and as in any area, you want to start with as objective data as you possibly can to understand both where the problems are and the nature of those problems. In the case of misclassification, I think it's very important that we understand the use of independent contracting generally, which is a very old and very legitimate form of business organization, and understand where it's being used both responsibly, but then also where it's being used in an inappropriate way, which is what gives rise to misclassification, which has the implications of not only in some cases allowing noncompliance to arise, but also deprives tax revenues to taxpayers and results in a number of related problems to that. So I would hope, and I'm not aware or involved in the current Labor Department efforts to look at misclassification, but I would hope if I was confirmed to undertake studies to understand both the use of legitimate independent contracting and then within that where misclassification occurs and how great those problems might be.
Well, that's very good. I thank you very much.